Let's talk about the plot diagram. Many of the stories that you'll read will follow this diagram in some fashion. The first thing that typically happens in a story is the exposition. This is where you learn about the setting, the time, the characters are introduced. It's basically an introduction for what's about to happen over the course of the entire story. At some point after that, you'll notice something called a complicating incident. This is something that will set into motion a whole chain of events that the story is centered around. From there on, you have the rising action. This is where tension is continually built up throughout the story. There may be little crises that come up along the way, just little things to help move the story along. Once it gets to that highest point of action and tension, you'll have the climax. Since there's nowhere to go after the climax, we have what's called falling action. Falling action is what happens when maybe the end battle or the end confrontation between characters has happened, and now we're just winding things down. There's not as much tension in the story any longer, but we're just seeing how that climax eventually gets resolved. The resolution is what happens when we find out how all the characters move on after this complicating incident has been addressed. This is also referred to as the denouement. A lot of times when you read stories, you'll have little mini climaxes, a lot of rising and falling action that occur within the story. So a lot of stories won't follow this pattern exactly, but if you look at the story as a whole, you'll see that this is pretty consistent between most stories. Some stories may start at one place and then do flashbacks and flash forwards and use a lot of foreshadowing. Those kinds of things still, if you'd put them in chronological order, would reflect a diagram that looks a lot like this.